Yeah, so class 15, we had two chapters. The HTTP is more of a conceptual understanding, not coding, but then the forms is some coding, especially the validation. Big thing is you want to figure out how the internet works. At a very high level, you don't need to know every little piece of it. The differences, the different parts of a URL. This helps many different ways whenever you're building something and you want to pass in information, or to be honest, I use it a lot when I'm debugging. I look at my URL to see, what properties is it trying to figure out. What file path is it trying to go down. The HTTP request and response flow, because whenever you ask for something, you're going to hopefully get something back, and then what are you expecting back? How to create and submit HTML forms. That's a lot of the more coding part of it. And then common input types and attributes. The main thing is HTTP. So there's a lot of information on here. I kind of want to go over it. I guess I'm in the way a little bit of some of those words, but I just copied and pasted that out of the textbook, at least the response codes. The big thing you need to know is every time you ask for a website, it has to be somewhere. And whatever that somewhere is called a server. Sometimes it's just like a database or a text file server, like it's just holding text files. Sometimes it does more and it processes a little bit, but it doesn't matter what type of server. Whenever you are requesting information, your machine is the client machine requesting, and then the server is processing and giving you your response back. So client server. Some other key vocabulary words there. HTTP. You'll see that a lot. You used to see back in the day that it used to be just HTTP. Now, whenever you look at URLs, there's HTTPS. That S is for secure. So the protocol anymore is you have to have a certificate that's signed by an authority, and then that thing verifies that your URL is owned by you. So there's a little bit of stuff that I don't think, at least not yet, we haven't went over. I will probably do maybe a mini lesson on some of that because I think it's interesting to know. I've had to update SSL certs on my servers before. You have to do it usually once a year. So it's usually up to somebody's team, either the DevOps, or if you're a smaller team like my current team, my team manages all that itself. But that's to add the S to the end. And if you don't hit it with an S, it says, hey, this site is unsecure. You probably shouldn't go here. So if you've ever seen one of those, it's usually because the SSL cert's expired. TCP is a type of protocol. Those gamers out there, there's a UDP. The difference is TCP on the internet. I'm going to go and I say, hey, I want this website. It's going to respond back and say, okay, I'm going to send 24 packets of information that if you put them all together will be this website. So if there's 24 packets, each packet is sent individually across the internet, and they all don't go the same path either. So even though the server sends it 1 through 24, sometimes it gets received and out of order. And that's perfectly normal because each of them are signed with which number they are, like which page number they are. Even it's not a web page, which packet number they are. So whenever your computer gets it, it starts piecing them all together and putting them all together. And let's say that it's missing a packet or two. It'll know that, and it'll go back to the server and say, hey, I'm missing packet 5. Can you resend that one packet so I get all my packets? And so this TCP ensures that you're going to get all the packets that you want. Where UDP, especially for gaming, it does not ensure that you get all the packets. And the reason for that is whenever you're doing like online gaming, if I sent and received and I had to verify that I had everything before I could even do anything, your game's too slow. So if you ever see other ways, like gaming has a different protocol because it's like I'm going to send everything, hope it gets there, but then it's always receiving things, it hopes it gets it. So cuts down on handshakes, absolutely. You know, and IP is just the internet protocol, so all of them follow that. DNS, domain name server, when you type in google.com, you have to register your domain with a domain name server. So I don't know about strongly suggest, but there are several people that I know that will go out and at least grab their name. So don't do this because I just said it, but you know, I should. I'm not saying I have to by any means. Go out and say, you know, my name is Philip Hodges. Before another Philip Hodges goes and grabs my name, I should try to go out and buy philiphodges.com. That's a common thing that people would do, is buy their name, .com or .org or whatever else you want to. But whenever I do that, that domain name server then has to match it with where it's pointing it to, which is an IP address. So when you do that, you got to usually attach it to an IP address so that you don't have to memorize all the numbers. You don't need to know that google.com is, and I don't know what it is off the top of my head because it's too hard to memorize, but the domain name server takes care of all of that for you. You just type in the words that kind of make sense or should make sense, and then it'll translate that into the IP address and go get it. When you type in a URL, there's several different parts. There's the scheme, there's the host, the port. You usually don't see the ports whenever you do yours, but whenever we get into more of the back-end services, ports, I'll bring that up more. But just know that whenever you access a computer, you can actually access it on many different ports. Of course, on that computer, it has to know that you're wanting to use those ports, or else it'll just deny your request. And I think, well, I know 80, port 80 is the HTTP, but again, nobody ever uses that anymore. So it's the 443, which is the HTTPS port. Then 33, I always have to look it up. It's like your SQL or MySQL port. So there's different ports that once you start working with what you need to, you'll memorize the traditional port numbers or the typical port numbers. What's unique is you can change those as long as everybody agrees. But the path is everything afterwards. So if I said google.com, that would be the host. The HTTPS is the scheme. Whenever you do the live, or if you open up your file, it might say file /, so the file would be the scheme. And then your path is everything else after that. So it might be google.com/search. And so search would be the path. And then you can have a query string, and we'll talk about that just a little bit. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. If not, I definitely bring it up later. I don't usually use query strings. I put all of mine in either one. Going into the next thing, there's request. When I make a request to a service, the two most common, these are not all of them, there's several other ones, is get and post. Those are your two most common ones. Your get is usually if you're wanting to get information. So you say get and you do this. That's usually when you do use a query string. So if you want to get information, but you want to filter it a little bit, you usually use a query string. And the reason why get requests do not use bodies. So you can't put anything in the body. It's just the URL. You say, get this URL, and it returns information to you. But with post requests, you can actually put things in the body. Whenever we get into the unit 2, we will re-go over a lot of this stuff because right now you're getting and posting, but it's you're not manipulating much. Or at least you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. It will make a lot more sense once we're sending information to an API or a backend service. So I will make sure that we bring out a tool called Postman. It's a tool that I use to do get, post, put requests. So we'll get into that more in depth later. I think right now it's just the high level overview. So get requests are for getting information. Posting is to usually push information. So let's say I want to add information to a database. I'm always going to use a post request. I can't use a get request. Get is for getting information. Post is for sending information. Headers, there can be several reasons that you put different things in your headers. The most common is some kind of authentication. Usually there's like a bearer token that a lot of services will want. But there's also like response types. Do you want, are you sending a JSON? Are you trying to receive a JSON back? Just different headers, or kind of like your topics, but not your actual information. It's like the higher level stuff. And then your body, if it has a body, that's the information that you're trying to send to the server. Once you send this information, whether it's you're trying to get information or you're trying to send information, you will get a response. There'll be a response line that usually has a response code in it. Maybe some other information. There's going to be a header that comes back. There is a blank line because all of this is text, and then there's going to be a body, and the body can be formatted into a JSON template or different types of bodies that it can have. The response codes that will come back in the status line are usually either 100, 200, 300, 400, or 500. Generically, these are the response codes. If I am creating the server, I get to tell what response code I'm going to send back. It is very typical to use the most common one so that people actually understand when they get one of these response codes what it means. But technically you don't have to. Nobody's saying anything's right or wrong. Again, the one question was like 404, it says that something's not there. So a question was asking like, why is it 404 whenever it's a client? And he was absolutely right. 404 is whenever you are asking something and when it hits the server, if there's any error between the request and it going to the server, it's going to be a 400 error. 500 errors are once it accepts that. If there's an error after that, it's a 500 error. So accessing, if you're not authorized, it's a 400 error. If the thing's not there, it's a 400 error. There's many different reasons for a 400 error, but it won't let you get to the business logic that's behind whatever you're trying to do. If it doesn't let you get behind there, it's a 400. Once it gets behind there and then there's a mistake or an error, then it's a 500. So for instance, let's say I said the right URL with the right authentication, with the right information at once, and then I put in an email address and I'm really wanting the response back of the user of that email address. Well, it's going to go look up the email address for that user, and maybe it comes back with that email address is not good, meaning maybe it's not good formatting. So you forgot the @ sign or whatever else. It could say a 500 error because it sees that you're trying to do an email address. Everything looks like it should up front, but then once it starts actually operating, it says, hold on, something's wrong here. So then it's a 500. So. Yeah, and I'm one that I don't like covering things too in depth until we have like the reason and the purpose, because it just post more questions, especially whenever the real focus of this is being able to send requests right now. The unit 2 is receiving the request. So there's that 2-part thing. So, and then another cool thing about all of this is the browser developer tools. I think I showed this the last time I was online, and it's that inspect element, or I forgot the shortcut. I just always right click and hit inspect. But we'll go over those some more too. Okay. If there were any other questions in chapter 24, definitely post them in the chat. I'll read them here in a second. I'm going to talk about chapter 25, mainly dealing with forms. The most common way that you want to send information to a service is through a form. So you're trying to collect information from a user, you're going to probably use a form. One reason why this is not second nature to me, whenever I was developing a little bit, I'm not a big front-end developer, I'm more back-end. I was doing Angular, and Angular has its own forms. So then I'm using their stuff for this. So it's really good to understand these topics and know these vocabulary words. But whenever we get into React, or if you get into Angular, there usually it's going to be a library that does a lot of this for you. So you have to learn their syntax that they want you to use. So just know that that's out there. You need to learn the basics first, but in a big enterprise application, you're not going to just use these basic ones. You're going to use whatever templating they tell you to. But there's form. Hopefully everybody knows what a form is. Usually in a form, you have an action and then a method, which I said an example of post here, but it could be a get. Your action, it could be another JavaScript file. It could be a URL. So your action is like, what do you want me to do with this information? Where is this information going? Is really what that's asking. Your label is helping the users say whenever they're putting in the input, what are they really putting in the input? I did put a bunch of different input types in here, text, password, date, email, number, checkbox, radio. You can assign values. These are default values, such as the example they gave was JavaScript. It doesn't have to be JavaScript. It can be anything they want. And then you do want to assign a name to your input. So this is kind of like that key value pair that we're always doing. So your variable name is this name. And then the value would be whatever they typed in or clicked or however they responded with their input. Just like input, there is a text area. It's almost the same thing. I mean, I'm not a front-end developer. I wish that this was actually an input type, just to make it all the same, but it is its own thing. And you have to assign it a name, or you don't have to, I guess, but you usually assign it a name because usually you're wanting to retrieve that information. But text area has other attributes you can put on it. And then select, if you want to select with options, you can use that. And then the button, by default, if you only have one button in your form, it usually is your submit button. You'll see code all over the place doing all types of things where it'll actually have a type of submit. And I've seen that as well. So the button. And then the other thing that it talks about is how to validate with JavaScript, which is using last class's stuff, which, to be honest, if we have time, I actually want to zoom through that as well. I didn't hear a lot of input one way or another if people understood it. Some people were wanting to see a little bit of an exercise, but I'm thinking the studio was a good help for you guys to solidify some of that. So I will, I'll try to go over that a little bit if we have time. So. I'm going to talk about validation, and then we're pretty much done. So if you have questions, definitely type them in the chat, and I'll try to respond to those after this. So the main coding part that you can Google a lot of it, but it's a little bit harder to Google, is the JavaScript validation stuff. These are the steps I copied and pasted more or less from the book, but I just wanted to call them out. So the first thing you want to do is add an event handler. So I put this example down here in the bottom so you can see each line. So add an event handler. I'm trying to get a laser pointer up. There we go. There we go. I didn't want to. Oh, well. You want to add an event handler for the window load event. So that's this, on load. And then within this handler, you want to add an event handler for the form submit event. So it grabbed the form and made an event, a listener off of that form for the submit. So once you submit that form, what does it want you to do? And then you're going to retrieve the input values that need to be validated. So in this example, there were two. There were user name and team name. So you're going to retrieve those values. And then you're going to check. So an if, if they're blank. And if they are blank, you're going to put up an alert and stop the rest of it, which is stopping the submission for this one because it is a submit listener. So I think with this that they gave us in the book, with these steps, pretty straightforward. I've used required attributes. I didn't see that in the book, and again, I don't develop front end all the time. And to be honest, I didn't have enough time to go clear off the curriculum. I usually start Googling things that I've seen. So. Just pausing for the questions. Okay, so so question, can I put multiple if statements? Yeah, this is why we've spent the however many long weeks of JavaScript, because now that we're in, once you do add event listener, this is JavaScript. This looks very similar to some of the stuff that you've seen. So anything that we have done, you can do here. So yeah, put multiple if statements. You can do for loops. You can do whatever you want to in here. Any type of logic statement that you want to do. And it's usually to help user experience. So yeah, and like Lucas said, yeah, React will also have many ways to handle validation. That's the other thing. I haven't dove too much in this because whenever I've dealt with Angular, I just bring in their forms and then their validation with those forms. You need to know I would take a lot of this chapter and understand that it's a bigger concept. You need to understand the concept, but it's okay if you don't know every single little bitty syntax thing, or you need to understand the process. You need to understand the logic of all the stuff. But if you're thinking, oh, I need to know in 2 weeks how to just do this without any help, you don't need to know that. You need to know the logic. And again, I'll keep answering questions even off of this stuff, but that's what we've been doing. Technically, graded assignment 4 is due Monday. I have had some of you reach out a little bit, just asking things and great questions. I'm glad some of you are like doing more than what the tests are asking because you're just having fun and exploring. That's how I would treat assignment 4. Just go off, explore, have fun, and then pass the test that they say. So. Because a couple people did bring it up, I do have my slides from last. I had everything ready to go. So I'm going to zoom through this. If you want me to reiterate or copy through something, let me know. But I'm just going to go ahead and do this because I felt really bad that I didn't get you a video up. So remember everything that I'm explaining. Remember, you're keeping it at a high level. This is not coding. This is understanding bigger concepts. When we make a web page and when I get to the live coding, I split my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript out every single time. That's just normal. When you get to bigger projects. When you have small projects, you can do whatever you want to. But we're going to have these 3 concepts. The main thing we're talking about with adding JavaScript, that's the whole point of this. We talked about HTML, we talked about CSS. Now, how do we integrate JavaScript and why? Well, you can have a static web page where there's no like real clicking and like calculation and manipulation. Those are static web pages. And then if you have something more moving, more actionable, they're usually called dynamic web pages. Let's say 15 years ago, it was easy to tell the difference between these two. Now that HTML in its language and its structure has gathered a lot of dynamic things in it. And then when you talk about React and Angular, some things that people call static aren't really static, but so there's a little bit of blurriness here. So nobody's going to ask you, is this a static website or a dynamic website? So don't worry about that. Just understand that you want dynamic websites because you want more user interaction. So that's the whole point of this. Get more interaction, get more. It doesn't have to be straight JavaScript, but you want users to want to come to your website. Each browser, it is very important to know, each browser does have its own engine for running JavaScript. They do not run Node.js. They have their own, each of them have their own, which then what happens is when you're developing something and you write it in whatever language, you technically have to test it in all of the different browsers if you want your users to see the same experience. Now, I will say, 15 years ago, there were lots of inconsistencies between the browsers. Nowadays, there's very little inconsistencies between the browsers. Most of the browsers do the same exact thing. So unless if you're doing something that's brand new, most of them will do just fine. But it is important to know that if you work as a front-end developer, you will have all the browsers set up on your machine. You'll have 5 or 6 different browsers actively on your machine, always testing all your stuff to make sure it all looks the same. And then somebody else will have their iPad out, and somebody else will have their phone out, and somebody else will have different sized machines, and you guys will all be testing different things. But just know that all of those are running different JavaScript. Common methods for manipulating the DOM. So there's the DOM is how your browser sees these objects. So your browser sees the document, it sees the paragraph, it sees every single element it sees as an object. Now, if you're just writing a static site, that doesn't matter. You just throw your stuff up there and you're good. Once you want to start manipulating those objects, that's what we're really getting into here, is manipulating of those objects. That's when we need to know, well, how can I distinguish between this paragraph and this paragraph? How does it know that I want this to run before this? How does it know that I want a new window, just my link to go to a new window, or keep it itself? Like there's all those different things that when you talk about interactivity, that you do need to know the basics. But then, to be honest, I figured out almost everything else while trial and error. So having really good development tools, an IDE that knows what you're doing, and then also the architecture of knowing that there are element tags like paragraphs, knowing that there are classes, and so you can identify things by classes, and then you can also identify elements by ID. So to be honest, calling it DOM and getting really sophisticated into the weeds about this document object model and these kind of things, I wouldn't stress right now about those as much as how do I get to the element or the group of elements or the tags, depending on how you want to structure it. How do I get to that stuff so that I can manipulate it? That, if you're thinking at that level, then this stuff is fine. I mean, this is just how you do it. So the document by itself has a title. You can get the element by ID. You can query things. You can query all of the things, meaning a query selector, if you said get a paragraph, it'll get the first paragraph it sees, where if you do query selector all, it'll get all the paragraphs it sees. Window, like your viewable space there, you can throw alerts. You can throw confirms. You can get locations. You can put it in the console. Once you get an element, so usually you do the get element by, however, you can get the attributes or set the attributes of an element. You can set the style. The inner HTML is like the text inside there. So I think that sometimes people really focus in on like, well, how does it all do all this stuff? And at your guys' level, don't think about the how is the how it does everything in the behind the scenes, as much as how can I get it to manipulate the way I want to. So stay not as deep there. I'm going to go over these two things, and I'm going to start answering questions. The other common thing is where to put the script. And because we just did the other unit, you guys should know that if you want the script to run, you probably want to do it on an onload. Make sure that the window has loaded first before you actually put the script in there or run the script. Now, where you actually put the script can be anywhere, but it tries to load top to bottom. But I'm letting you know, I've seen so many inconsistencies. If you are, back on really bad internet, you might actually get the bottom of your web page to load before the top of your web page. I don't know how old some of you are, but I actually remember back in the day of dial-up where I would see like it tried to go down and then it might hesitate and it would skip and it would go here and then it would go back in the middle and then it just put it in as whenever it got it. And that's why I'm actually pretty good at like your packets and your networking, is because I saw when it was slow, so it made sense. Oh, that's why my website didn't load whenever I clicked load. Like it was piecing together things. So the big thing about the scripts, make sure your stuff loads before you start running your scripts. And then the events you can trigger events. JavaScript is a triggering thing, meaning it usually it runs on load. That's an event. It's triggered by that event. So JavaScript is an event-driven language, meaning that it doesn't just work. It's made so that you say when this, what event, when this does this, then do this. So triggering and then handling. How do you trigger your event? How do you handle your event? And then there are built-in DOM events. I think some of these DOM events built into HTML, and of course now you're starting to get a little bit out of my normal thing. There are some events that are built into HTML now, so JavaScript isn't as needed. There's a debate right now about jQuery. I know I've seen that word thrown out there a little bit. jQuery was something that was 100% needed 10, 15 years ago. Of course, the people that love it still think that it's needed today. I've also heard some people say it's not needed today because there's some built-in functionality now with HTML. I did want to show you some example code, but while I have that on the screen, I'm going to try to catch up to these questions. I'm glad that most of you can hear me just fine. I don't think I can blame it on solar flares this time, though. Right. If you posted a question, I saw a lot of responses, some funny comments, but I didn't see hardly any questions in there. So post it again because I didn't see it. So whenever you're doing these, there are different ways to get the elements that you want. You can get the elements by class. I don't know if the book actually showed you this or not. This is what so over the weekend, I had time. So I Googled some other things to make this more interesting. And so I think, I don't know if these were both in the book or not, but you can do the get elements by class name. That's a method that's in the document. Or you can do query selector and then do the dot. Remember, the dot means class, just like with CSS. You can get element by ID. That we see quite a bit. We can get elements by tag name, or we can do query selector all. And remember, since it does not have a dot, that's a tag. Here is an example. The script. I think this was from the book. It's talking about urang. It talks about how you want to get your element by ID, your main text. Here, let's see if I can do this again. Okay, so your main, I didn't want to cross it out. Well, it's crossed out. So your main text, it goes right up here and it grabs whatever this is. And remember, this is your whole, that's bigger than that. It is your whole entire paragraph here. So it says, get this element. So it gets this whole entire thing. And it says the .inner HTML, which is the white above here, it's going to add urang to it. So if you pushed this button, well, it actually didn't assign it yet. Here it is. It adds an event listener to the button. And it says when you click this button, you're going to do the urang function. So this calls this, which then grabs this stuff and it adds the text onto there. So that's where you guys are going. Welcome to software development. Like this is where people start getting very confused, not very confused. This is where your brain starts to like have to slow down, and you have to do exactly what I'm doing, just mentally. You're like, your function, you have this main text. Well, it didn't get called yet. Where did it get called at? Well, it got called at down here. And so then you start figuring out, oh, so whenever my button gets clicked, I do the urang, and the urang really does two things. It prints out to my console log, and it adds this text onto the end right there. Yeah. That's why I'm also good at this. My attention, I can ping pong pretty fast. So the add event listener, this is from the book, I think. You say the event name. I was going to Google that and show you that, but you guys can Google that. There are several different event names that you could use. So you just Google them, figure out which one you want, like on click or click. Mouse over, I think, was one that you were supposed to be doing. There's several different ones, and I have to Google them every single time because I don't use them often enough. So you say what event name that you're listening for, and then you say your function. You can also do event types and targets. I don't know why they said event type here. I guess just an example, but this is your event type. You're saying your event name is your event type. That's what it's looking for. So I don't know why you would need that. But then your target is kind of your target that you're looking for. So play around with those if you want to. This one is exaggerating this stop propagation. I don't know. So here's my little soapbox about this. I'm not used to needing this as much as they say, because I'm not going to add a click to a button, to a document, to whatever. Like, I'm going to be more specific in what I want, so I don't have to stop the propagation from other events being triggered, because I'm just going to write my triggering in a way that it only gets called when this specific things happen. It's not going to get called through this chaining of events. Now, are there reasons to do this? Absolutely. I'm not saying that you should never do this. I'm letting you know, as a beginner, you will not be looking or trying to create something that has this sophistication to it. On the other hand, it's good to know about. So that's the difference. Are you trying to learn something through exposure, which that's what this is, or are you trying to learn something so that you can repeat it later? That's not what this is. So this is more for understanding that you can add event listeners, these click event listeners, to a button, to a toolbar, to whatever you want, to the whole entire document. That's what this one does. And it'll all work. So when you click the button, because the button is inside the toolbar, which is inside the whole entire document, when you click that button once, it actually triggers all three of those events. And so then the question is, well, what if I only want one of those events? And that's when you do the event.stop propagation, and it'll stop wherever it's at. It'll just not keep going. So you could do that on this weird situation here. But again, my mindset is only attach event listeners to things that you really want with functions that you really want to happen. I don't know why you would set it up like this, but it's good for an example. Again, it's good for the higher level thinking, not for what you're doing. Debugging, I have never debugged like this. Definitely having console logs with functions may be good, good debugging, but not the chaining of events. That's what I don't know. Yeah, if you wanted to do something like this just to have fun with users, be my guest. But I know that I think sometimes too business-like, I don't know, I'm thinking, I work at a bigger company. If I did something like this, they would not be so happy with me. So. Okay, so this is what I put in there. Websites aren't, and I told you this earlier, websites aren't sent all together. They're put in packets, and they're sent in packets, and your browser loads them as soon as it knows enough information to load, it starts loading them. And so because of this, different parts of the website, like pictures, buttons, other things, can load at different times. They don't have to wait for everything to load at once. So that's where some people fall into this trap of putting their JavaScript right inside their body, and then it doesn't trigger sometimes. Well, it's because it's waiting for something to load. Your JavaScript actually loaded before the other event, so then it's out of sync. That's why we always do this window.addEventListener load. And then the init is a function. This is a function, so it can be an anonymous function or it can be a named function. This is a named function. So remember, you have to declare where your scripts in CSS. I will talk to you about that when I show you my screen of code here in a second. I almost always use external, and it's mainly for teaching. In me making a small website, I might actually put some things internal, but for me teaching, the bigger it gets, the harder it is to find CSS and a JavaScript inside an HTML document. So once it gets big enough, you need to separate them. If you're the only one ever working on it, you can do whatever you want to. But if you're working in a company, you need to separate those and follow whatever structures and rules that they have set in place. They're almost all going to be external. So when they are external, some people have already got caught in this. When they are external, you have to bring them into your HTML. So remember with CSS, that's link, I think it's a link tag, and then it says type, and you're going to say style sheet. With JavaScript, you're going to do the script tag and then say source, SCR equals, and then you say that where your JavaScript is located. And you can bring multiple JavaScript files in there. So I can have 3 different script lines bringing in 3 different JavaScript files. That's perfectly fine. So having them external, that's where once they get big enough, you actually bring in multiple ones, because this JavaScript file is handling all the form stuff. So this is my form scripts. And then this JavaScript is handling all my, whatever. I can't think of something off the top of my head. But if you have enough JavaScript where you have separate concepts, then you want to make different JavaScript files so that whenever you're debugging, you know exactly which file to look inside. But you can bring it inside and just put the function directly inside the header or even in the body. So that was the main thing about Monday's lesson. Hopefully at least the doing of it was good with the studio. So hopefully you guys have that. I tried to keep it high level. I'm going to look at the questions. Yeah, I'm going to definitely show you what it looks like on an external file, because I think that's super important. So I'll show you that. Stacy, I don't know what you're meaning per se. Unless you're talking about why maybe not to do an external file is like if it loses its link or if it messes up there, then it also messes up what it brings in. But hopefully I can explain a little bit of that here in just a second. I'm going to show you my code, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break. I'm just going to show you the linking, and then we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Yeah. Nope, wrong way. All right. So every single one of my headers, when I'm doing teaching, not like ever in my life, but when I'm doing teaching of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, this is what they all look like. I have a header. It might have a char set. That's a smart thing to do. It's not absolutely needed. Most of the time you want a title. Remember, the title is what shows up in the tab up in your browser. And then this right here is how I link my CSS. And then this is how I link my JavaScript. And then I don't put any of my JavaScript in here. I know you're not expected to see any of that stuff, but if you look real fast, there's no script in here. I have one script tag, and it's this thing right here. And so every time I go script, the other thing for typo purposes, you should always do a source equals, and then do the // and it should tell you what your files are right here. The most common mistake is not having the appropriate file name or a typo, meaning I don't know why. But in a lot of the stuff that was given from LaunchCode, your CSS file, some of them are called style.css, and some of them are styles with an s.css. And so you can't assume one or the other. Now, for me personally, I always like to use it with an S because hopefully there's more than one style linked in that sheet, but that's just me. It really doesn't matter. I can change those names. To be honest, my JavaScript doesn't need to say script.js. It can be Philip's favorite script.js. It doesn't matter what the name is as long as it's linked. That's all that matters. This knows how to get to it because it says, hey, stay in this parent. That's what the / is stay in this folder. And then that's it. So the question, why just for teaching? To be honest, if I have a small enough website, I'm just going to put everything on one page. So it just depends on if I can make an HTML document and put, instead of, because this is I think what the book has, and then you can write your scripts inside here. If I only have one script and that's the only thing I have, I might write that in here. If I only have CSS, I might actually write on all of my CSS. I might do something like this. So instead of creating a CSS file, I might just do this if it's small enough. It just really depends on the purpose. So I'm going to tell you, even me. So I know that you're going to hear what I say and take my way as probably the most truthful that you've seen. But then again, I'm coming from my personal experience, which my personal experience is going to be different than everybody else's personal experience. Also, on top of that, my business does things the way my business does things, and I've went to other businesses and they do them differently. So what hopefully many of you will get out of this Are there multiple ways? I think I saw this somewhere else. There are multiple ways to do things. To be honest, you want to know how to interpret all of them, but to get a job, you just need to know how to do one of them. That's all you're focusing on right now is how can I do this and get it working? That's all you care about. And then being able to see other ways and be like, oh, if I spend enough time in there, I understand what they're doing. That's why you see different ways, is so that when you see other people's work, you can understand it. When you actually get the job, they will tell you, this is how we do this. Or you'll see an HTML file given to you and they'll be like, this is how I want you to set it up. And you're just going to mimic what they do. So I think sometimes people feel like you have to understand how to build this from scratch. And I don't build almost anything from scratch. Like I have thousands of files that I look at that's already been built, and the business says, I want this changed. I spend 3/4 of my time finding where in the code does this even live at? How do I get the code to respond to me? Not even do the thing that they ask, just respond to me. And then how can I test it? How can I not break other people's code? Like that's 3/4 of my job is not writing code. So understanding things, figuring out how things work, that's what you're trying to figure out during this course. And if you can get it to work one way, then you're set for now. If you want to be a senior level, in 5 years, 10 years down the road, then that's whenever you do need to know multiple ones. Yeah, so the other question, let's say that I had 3 different JavaScript. It is 100% acceptable to have, this one, something like this. You can have multiple scripts and it'll bring in all 3 of those scripts. So just depends. Again, we're working on small projects. You probably only need one. Okay. So I showed you how to bring in a script. And if I use control, this is my favorite trick on everything. If I hold down control, you can see my finger, my hand turns to a pointer. And when I click on this, it actually opens up the JavaScript folder. So everything in here gets brought into that index file, just like I typed it in there. So I think yeah, so okay, so there is a question about precedence. If you're CSS, there can be overlaps of things. With JavaScript, if you have overlaps in JavaScript, that's bad code. So you should never have it where you need to think about precedence of JavaScript code. With styling, some things are in a paragraph, but sometimes they're in this section of paragraph. So you might, put 2 different stylings where you want one to override the other if, it's underneath, or that's why I don't do CSS. CSS, there's a whole bunch of other different rules that precedence important. But JavaScript is just like anything else. If you have a function and it says button clicked and you click a button, it'll run any of the scripts that it does. It doesn't pick just one, it does them all. I don't know if I'd even say deceptively. All right. Let's see. So to be honest, I'm going to check one site real quick. You guys were saying that this I know you're not seeing any. I know I haven't zoomed in. I'm just going to click the submit button. Come on. Oh, I changed it. Of course I did. I was trying to see if that website was back up. Here, I know another way to get to it. Maybe. I don't. Is it under general? Did somebody post it there? No. If that website does not work, I have a different, I don't think I have enough time. Here we go. Yeah, it still doesn't work. So this handlers education launch code thing is not working right now. And because I did go back and do the DOM stuff, I don't have enough time to kind of shortcut and try to work through this. So I'm just going to show you what I have. Hopefully it's as good as what you absolutely need. Also, somebody was asking me about these codes, asking about codes. You can just look them up. That's the thing about HTML. HTTP has been around for so long. If you Google it, it's around. So, okay. Let me. Okay. So I'm going to show you a couple things that I've done, and then let me know if you have any questions. Instead of doing the exercise, what I did, this is not what it asked you to do. I made my HTML. I'm going to close out of all of these. I made my HTML have all the different inputs that the lesson had. So this is just how my brain kind of works. As they went through the inputs, I'm like, why am I seeing these on different pages? Why can I just not put it on one page and then mess with it? So I did that. So as I found them, I started copying and pasting them. So the username and team name is going to be text. The text area, the mission description. And again, I didn't even care if these matched what we were actually doing. I just copied and pasted. Email is going to be type email. Report date is type date. Crew count is type number. That also has a min and a max. You don't always have to have a min and a max. You could just do number. The activities are going to be checkboxes. Now, the difference here is, and this is where I wish that I had that site up and running or a supplemental thing. When you have a checkbox with only one name, it'll say like on or off or true false. But if you have it the several names like ingredient, it'll actually start making it an array, which is slightly different. So just know that you can have a multiple select checkbox. And again, I'm not super familiar with these because Angular has its own version of these. And so, and when we get in, we'll do it in React for this class, but React will have a library that you just bring in and it'll have a form and it'll validate all this stuff for you. You still need to know how to, that name is how you call it, that you can have default values. Those are important. You can have radio buttons. So knowing what a checkbox is, knowing what a radio button is, knowing that if you have radio buttons with the same name, it kind of links them together. So it does that for you. Doing select with options, like that's a drop down, and you can have a default value. Actually, it's the first one is always the default value. But then you can, this is the actual value that gets passed into the back end. So oftentimes if I have simulation, then it's whatever the ID of my simulation is, so that I don't have to pass in this word, I'm passing in an ID. So that's where I wish this form, and I'll probably give you this code so you guys can copy and paste it and play with it if you wanted to later when that URL is there. So there are two ways to do this. If I right click over here, I can either just open up in default browser, or I can open up with live server. Either one of these will work. I think the typical is to open up with live server. Remember, I'm linking a style sheet. That style sheet does not do hardly anything, so do not get impressed with that. But my script is bringing in this validation script, which I'll show you in just a second. So right now we're focusing on what does the form look like? What do the inputs look like? And then secondly, we'll look at the validation. So I'm going to open this up, and then I'm going to zoom in. And so this is a text box. This is a text box. The one thing that it didn't show, let me do this. Username, I'm going to change this. Password. Let's do that. So whenever you do a password, it actually like hides the password for you. Sorry. So question was, day-to-day work, do I usually see one JS file or multiple? I see multiple. They're split up by topic or by group. So whenever I have a web page that has multiple tabs across the top, each tab might have its own JavaScript. If one tab or subsection of a web page has multiple pieces of it, I might see each of those individually too. So yeah, I always see multiple JavaScript because nobody wants to look at a 4,000 line JavaScript file and try to understand where their code is. Why do some browsers work better than others? I will be honest, I don't know much about Safari on browsers, but I know that originally Firefox or Mozilla, it was the developer browser. So whenever, 10, 15 years ago, it was the most well-known developer browser. It put a lot of investment into developer tools, where now Chrome also has. So now they're one's not way better than the others, but so we see there's a password type, the text box, you can make as big as you want. The email, even though right now it doesn't do anything, when I hit submit, it'll say, please include. This is this is exactly a type of validation that React and Angular build into almost everything. So I could do like a required tag and it'll tell me something like this and says, hey, this is needed. You can't go on without this. You can set validation rules in React and Angular so that they look like this by default. HTML has it for email. So just inside, that's not JavaScript. That wasn't JavaScript that did that. That was HTML. That's the same thing here. These numbers up and down, that's HTML. That's not JavaScript. So HTML has started to gain functionality just built into it. These are checkboxes, but then the radio one, because I made all of these names the same, it knows that it's just one of them. So that's the big difference between select and radio. If you only want one, you're going to do radio. If you want multiple, you do the checkbox. At first, you will regret it, but after you get used to it, they're amazing. These are your select options. Right. And inspect. So remember, if the thing was working, when I hit submit here, there'd be a network thing that says, hey, I went to this other web page, and then it would show you some things. I think I disabled mine because I knew it wasn't working. So what I did was I printed my things out to the console. So you can see my username. I don't think it's supposed to show team. Oh, I didn't change my name. That's what it was. This still says name team, which is really bad because this is what I typed in for my password that you can't see over here. And then description, email address, date, crew count. These other ones don't work exactly the way that they should because of how I am doing the console log. So just ignore these things for a second. They would have shown better on the other website. I was trying to fix that right before class and that wasn't working. But you can see that the facility and the operation are working because remember, simulation was 1, rocket test was 2, and it's reading those appropriately here. So, so input-wise, any questions on the input types or the HTML part, not the JavaScript part, but the HTML part? You won't ever use readline sync whenever you're doing that. That's the hard part about JavaScript. We didn't have the HTML to do this first, so you won't ever use it again. Okay, so let's look at the JavaScript. What I brought in, just like everybody else, you did a load function. This waits until the window is fully loaded before it even does any of this stuff. So then I said, hey, I want to add an event listener onto my form. Well, I had to go get my form first. If I would not have had this line, it would not know what form is. So I have to declare, what do I even mean by form? Well, go and select the form. This will grab the first form. So if I had multiple forms, this query selector would not be good. I would do something like get element by ID, and then if I did something like this, then over here on my form, I could say ID equals my form or something. So if this is very typical, you usually see IDs on a lot of things in HTML. Anytime you want to interact with JavaScript, I usually see this ID used all the time. So my form, get element by ID, get element by ID. Well, my ID is my form. So now I'm connecting it by ID rather than before it was just grabbing the first form it saw. So, well, even if I kept the ID there, if I had multiple forms here, it wouldn't know which one I wanted, so it'd grab the first one. Yeah, and you can do this with the div tag as well. Like that's you'll see multiple divs everywhere too. Div is just like a division. It's dividing into different ways. So you can do the div anyway. Yeah, so the action that I don't know if it'll make more sense or not, but your studio is going to potentially help you with the action part of the form. The action, when you do a form, just think of it. If you had a user fill out a form, let's say even in a doctor's office, you have even paper pencil. If they kept that form, it's not used to anybody. They have to give that form to somebody. So built into HTML, they know forms are going to get sent somewhere. So the action is where are you sending this form? When you hit submit, where is this going? Now this is going to an HTML, like this is going to a URL, but I could have it go to a file. Now it wouldn't be an index HTML, but I could make this form go into a JavaScript file. I could have it do lots of different things and go to a different location. So it doesn't have to be an HTML. It could be whatever, but that's the location it's going to. And it's going to use a post request. So now, obviously, you do want to use some kind of URL with a post or get request. You don't always want to just send it to another file, but there's a lot of ways to do this. So I think it can technically go into a file, but I haven't ever seen the action go straight to a file. What I've seen is the script. I could say right in here, say I can write JavaScript to write to file, and it's usually inside of the JavaScript file, the JavaScript function here. This is where I would write to a file. So I'd write that in the JavaScript. Same thing with the SQL database. Oftentimes, because there's additional things with the SQL database, like authentication, you'll usually make the SQL call inside of a JavaScript function. So sometimes this action is not always used or needed, because this is very built in. So you have to follow the documentation, the way that HTML forms are made. So this is a URI of a program to process the form information. So this one's built in. That's where the JavaScript thing comes in. Is like on submit, you can also have it trigger a JavaScript action, a JavaScript function to do that. Oh, that's what okay, so go back to the JavaScript. Getting close to time here. I said since the site's not working, I have this one. I'm going to remove this one so I can show you one other thing in the developer tools. But this one's one of those where I said, hey, if these things are blank, send an alert that all fields are required and stop the submission. Now, I did not do these for the checkboxes because by default, unless if you have like a terms of condition that you need to have checked, oftentimes these checkboxes, I don't need to know if they're checked or not. But I went through here and did all the query selector. Now, these are the ways that the book did it. They said input name is username. So it looks through all the inputs and it says, hey, find the name where this name username. What I could have done instead was done an ID and said username. And if I use the ID, then instead of query selector, I would say get element by ID, and then I would say username. I usually see this a little bit more often. But again, I work in a very small section of front-end development, so don't always take mine as like, oh, this is the way to do it. It's not, it's a way to do it. So you do it by query selector, you can get it by element ID, it does the same thing. I'm going to rerun this. I'm going to put it on network this time. Right. Now, this did break as expected because we know that it doesn't work. What I did want to show you, though, yes, right here. This is good. If I click on the network tab and click the request that was failed, I can actually see the headers that we just talked about that I told you don't worry too much about. But the headers already have the URL and policy. We didn't have to send any authentication, but it says, hey, I'm going to be sending a form. This could also be a JSON. So later on, we'll talk about JSON, and this could be a JSON and not a form, but it's telling the server what type of information to expect, and it says a form. And it tells me all this other information. What I like to show on this one, because even though it doesn't work, is my payload. It technically sends it like this. This is what we're seeing, all the parameters. It would have a question mark. And then it would look exactly like this. These are your query parameters that it was talking about. Now, of course, I don't like seeing it like this because it's hard to see. Also notice that whenever you have things like an @ sign, your @ sign, it doesn't send an @ sign. It sends this %40. that %40 HTML knows that that's an @ sign. So sometimes you won't always see the exact things. Spaces, slashes. There's certain characters. Just know that certain characters get transposed to different symbols. But I like to do the view parse, and so this is what it shows right here. So you can even see my password right there. And this is what it's getting sent. So always check if you're sending back and forth information, you're sending the payload, sending it there, and then you should be getting a response. But because it didn't even get there, it says no response. Yeah, hopefully you guys at least see this tab there. That's what I wanted to show you. Do you see how it's also sending? The live server said, hey, go get my script. And it says, therefore not modified, whatever that means. Anyway. So good question. Can you build code to not show a password? The short answer is, I don't think so. And it depends on where you're talking about. When you type in your password and send it, hopefully you are the ones you're like typing in. You know what you just typed in. Now, does it save that, or whenever you go back, it keeps all that stuff on the back end? So after you type it and send it the first time, it won't keep it again. But you just typed it in, so unfortunately you can see it. Now, how the HTTPS, that secure thing works, which I would love to talk a little bit about with encryption. If somebody did like a man-in-the-middle attack and was like seeing your packets go back and forth, they would not be able to see your password. So as long as it's HTTPS, S sends it encrypted. So the only person that would see it is you on your browser. So don't leave your computer unlocked whenever you're typing in your passwords. Yeah, site-to-site encryption. Any other last minute questions? I want to give you time to go to Studio. The studios can be pretty fun. Have fun with today's studio. Don't get frustrated. Help each other out. There's a couple points that your IAs will get you over that little tiny hump, and then you're like, oh, this is fun. So just have fun with it.